The oceans are the arteries of the global economy, and whoever controls these arteries controls the world. We live on a planet where 90% of trade is conducted by sea, yet the dominant power produces merely 0.1% of ships. This sounds like science fiction, but it is today's reality. For centuries, maritime supremacy determined which nations rose to greatness and which fell into oblivion. Alfred Thayer Mahan understood this when writing about sea power. Theodore Roosevelt knew it when building the Great White Fleet. Today, Chinese shipyards launch 1,000 vessels annually, while the US manages barely 10. Chinese production capabilities exceed American ones by 230-fold, and Americans are only just awakening from their lethargy. Yet as recently as 1975, it was America that was the world's largest shipbuilder. In the event of war over Taiwan, America may painfully discover that a fleet consists of more than just aircraft carriers and destroyers. It also includes tankers, freighters, and transport vessels. Can the US regain maritime dominance? Is it too late to catch up with the Middle Kingdom? And what does all this tell us about the balance of power in the 21st century? Let's see. Chinese shipyards launch 1,000 vessels every year. American ones? Barely 10. That's not a typo, it is the scale of a global shift. The world is returning to an old truth: whoever controls the seas controls trade. And whoever controls the trade sets the rules of the game. As the world reorients itself around sea lanes, shipping capacity and industrial strength, the smart question isn't if change is coming, it is how to position yourself before it hits. That is why I use XTB, an investment app that helps me react to global trends with action, not just analysis. With XTB you can invest in thousands of stocks and ETFs commission-free, up to 100,000 euros in monthly turnover. Whether you believe in China's shipbuilding boom or America's industrial comeback, you can act on your own insight. Knowledge is power, but only if you use it. Check out the possibilities which came up with the XTB app and invest responsibly. You will find a link in the description. By clicking it, you support this channel. 12 billion tons of goods annually, 90% of global trade, $3 to $6 trillion in value. The world's oceans are the foundation of life for each of us, even if we live deep inland. Adam Smith, the father of the free market, already knew in the 18th century that a merchant fleet was the basis of national power. And Alfred Thayer Mahan went further. He wrote about the inseparable bond between merchant and naval fleets. Whoever rules the seas rules the world. During decades of hyperglobalization, Asian countries did exactly what Mahan advised. While the West delocalized production, Asia built shipyards. Over the past 3 decades, Asian countries that based their growth model on exporting processed goods focused on developing their own shipbuilding industries and investing in port infrastructure. To this end, they mobilized massive resources in the form of public investment, subsidy programs, and preferential credit lines. During this same period, Western countries, led by the US, voluntarily withdrew from the race in both civilian and military shipbuilding. The result? China today controls 53% of global ship production, America a mere 0.1%, barely 73,000 tons annually. In 2023, Chinese shipyards launched 1,000 new vessels, American ones only 10. Just 2 decades ago, the disparity was 3 times smaller, and in 1975, America was the global leader in shipbuilding. Today, even US allies, Japan with 13% global share, and South Korea with 29%, leave America far behind. In Europe, Italy and France produce the most ships, though this amounts to merely 1% each on a global scale. This phenomenon is largely a consequence of the second era of globalization and the growing economic significance of Asian tigers, which due to geographical conditions and production cost competitiveness, oriented their economy strategies toward exporting goods by sea. China, the main geopolitical rival of the US, has for years treated the shipbuilding sector as a weapon in the struggle for global dominance. As a maritime power, the US has relied since the end of World War II on a strong merchant fleet and control of sea lanes ensured by a blue ocean naval fleet based on aircraft carriers and supporting task forces. Theodore Roosevelt, who oversaw the expansion of the US Navy, despite periods of isolationism, perfectly understood the importance of sea power. He utilized the fleet in foreign policy, from gunboat diplomacy to combat use during the Spanish-American War. It was during his tenure that significant modernization occurred, leading to the creation of the famous Great White Fleet, which circumnavigated the globe in 1907, demonstrating America's global position. 2 world wars mobilized the American industrial base and convinced decision-makers of the crucial importance of a powerful fleet. The paradox now is that despite its position as a maritime power, the US to this day obtains 80% of imported goods by sea, but 98% of the ships that deliver them are produced abroad. The statistics are merciless. Since the 1980s and the beginning of the crisis in American industry, the gradual decline in shipyard production had a direct impact on the Navy's combat potential. Ronald Reagan's administration withdrew subsidies from the sector, counting on free market forces. The collapse of the American industrial base and mining sector made it difficult to obtain materials essential for ship production. Steel is a flagship example. 25% must be imported from abroad. Nevertheless, the pace of decline remains surprising. After the Cold War ended, business fled the defense industry, which consolidated into merely 5 large corporations. Since the early 1990s, the number of workers in military shipyards has fallen fourfold, while average ship production costs have doubled. On a global scale, the American shipbuilding sector clearly lost primarily in the area of cost competition to Asian rivals, who, supported by public investment, focused on increasing scale and capturing market share. Today's balance is dramatic. Only 80 ships produced in America are currently actively engaged in maritime trade, compared to nearly 5,500 Chinese vessels. For comparison, during World War II, Americans simultaneously utilized as many as 10,000 merchant fleet ships. The Office of Naval Intelligence claims that China's production capabilities are even 230 times higher than America's. But the problems concern not only shipyards and production capabilities, but also maritime infrastructure. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that the US should spend over $160 billion on port renewal. Problems with the American Navy are increasingly raised by members of Congress. Former Congressman Mike Gallagher warned in his letter against the collapse of the shipbuilding industry, drawing attention to critically low capabilities for maritime troop transport. He also criticizes outdated regulations such as the Jones Act of 1920, which restricts the use of ships built outside the US in domestic maritime trade. Considerable controversy in America is caused by the habitually recurring delays in military ship production, from aircraft carriers to destroyers and submarines. In June this year, Secretary of the Navy John Phelan, during a Senate hearing, aptly summarized the situation, saying that all US Navy programs are, quote, one big mess. An interesting case study is the production of Virginia-class nuclear-powered submarines, which are to replace Los Angeles-class units that have been in service for nearly 3 decades. Only 2 American shipyards are actively working on submarines, and their capabilities are insufficient to build 2 Virginia-class units annually, which has been the official US Navy goal for years. The problem is compounded by the fragmentation of resources due to simultaneous construction of Columbia-class submarines, which, due to their ability to carry strategic arsenals, are the main priority of the Navy and the Department of Defense. Delays in Virginia submarine deliveries could bury the 2021 AUKUS Pact, under which Australia was to purchase 5 units of this type over the next 2 decades. Worse still, the Australians have no alternative bridging situation after retiring Collins-class submarines. All these problems combined mean that at the beginning of the next decade, in 2032, the US will have only about 40 submarines, despite the official requirement to maintain 66 units in active service. With simultaneous weakening of allies led by Australia, the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific will clearly shift against America. Independent forecasts indicate that by 2030, China will have a fleet exceeding 420 ships in active service, while the US Navy is simultaneously retiring units. That said, it is worth remembering that in terms of tonnage, equipment quality, firepower, and combat crew experience, the US Navy still maintains significant advantages. On the other hand, dependence on aircraft carriers in the era of advanced hypersonic missiles may prove to be a source of vulnerability for the US Navy in a conflict dominated by asymmetric warfare means. America's greatest asset in a potential sea battle, beyond Allied support, will be the low detectability and operational range offered by nuclear-powered submarines. In the case of destroyers, which form the foundation of modern navies, the US is capable of producing only 2 units annually, compared to nearly 10 times greater potential from allied South Korea. The main problems concern both the ship design phase and lack of industrial capabilities or worker shortages. A flagship example of incompetence and poor planning is the Zumwalt-class stealth destroyer project, of which only 3 were produced despite plans for a 10-fold larger order. Ultimately, the unit cost of the ship was approximately $8 billion. Interestingly, the project was initiated in the 1990s, which combined with many other programs, particularly military aircraft like the F-22 Raptor, exposes flaws in the American system of designing and ordering new military platforms. Currently, the largest US Navy projects concern building new Ford-class aircraft carriers, which are to maintain American capability for global power projection. New Constellation-class frigates will also play an increasingly important role, intended to replace the venerable Ticonderoga cruisers by the end of the decade. As with other ship types, production of the first 6 frigates is delayed by 3 years. The US Navy wants to acquire 20 ships of this class in total. In the military domain, beyond the widely discussed numerical advantage of China, the level of ship modernization is noteworthy. As many as 70% of PRC warships in active service were launched after 2010, with new Type 55 destroyers constituting the lion's share. For comparison, in the US fleet, this is only 25% of units. Similarly to military aircraft, many US Navy units still remember the Cold War era and require costly upgrades to maintain combat capability. Experts indicate that currently allocated funds for ship maintenance are insufficient, estimated a gap of nearly $2 billion. However, America does not intend to passively observe this growing disparity. The Navy Department recently announced the US Navy's financial plan for 2026, and it is the largest in years. The US Navy wants to acquire as many as 19 new ships in a single fiscal year, more than 3 times the previous amount. The budget, nearly $290 billion, of which $7 billion will go toward developing port and shipyard infrastructure. If the plan's assumptions are met, the Navy wants to achieve a fleet size of 287 ships. Importantly, $700 million from this pool is to be allocated to autonomous maritime technologies, because the future of naval warfare is not just larger ships, but also underwater drones and unmanned fleets. However, all of this is just still a plan. And for anything to move forward, congressional approval will be needed. And this is not so obvious. Donald Trump's administration, already during its first term, proclaimed ambitious, albeit unrealistic plans to increase naval potential to 350 ships. In April 2025, Donald Trump signed another important decree, restoring America's maritime dominance, which communicated the need to create a comprehensive maritime strategy and implement new financial instruments to increase private investment in the shipbuilding sector. The document also prominently features the ambition to increase coordination of actions with allies and impose new trade barriers on Chinese ship exports and related technologies. The Trump administration also proposed creating special economic zones to encourage new investors. Still, the presidential decree is primarily promises and goal definition, whose fulfillment will depend on the will of Congress representatives, the Navy, and business. The collapse of the American shipbuilding industry is most visible when directly compared to actions taken by China. In 2002, just 1 year after joining the World Trade Organization, Prime Minister Zhu Zhongji, called by many China's economic czar, publicly emphasized the importance of the shipbuilding sector, announcing that by 2015, so in 13 years, China will become number 1 in the world in terms of building new ships. Remember that at the dawn of the 21st century, China produced merely 5% of ships globally. However, over the next 2 decades, 3 port cities, Bohai, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, became the world's largest ship production hubs. By 2010 alone, the number of shipyards increased from 46 to nearly 300, causing the scale of annual production to jump by an incredible 3,700%. This success was due to state intervention, ruthless competition in the Chinese shipbuilding sector, but also the influx of foreign capital. During the crucial growth period between 2006 and 2013, subsidies constituted nearly half of the Chinese shipbuilding sector's revenues, with Japan and Korea being the biggest losers of the years marked by financial crisis. It was precisely regular financial injections and massive state orders that proved invaluable in protecting Chinese industry in the face of declining demand in global markets. According to CSIS calculations, over 8 years until 2018, the state provided $130 billion in support for the sector, including preferential loans and credit lines. Similar industrial policy measures were successfully applied in other industry branches, including green energy sectors. The key to success proved to be sector consolidation, which ended with a major merger in 2019. Despite a 50% decline in the number of shipyards during the second decade of the 21st century, total production nearly doubled. Currently, 75% of global orders covering deliveries until the end of the decade go to Chinese producers. Most importantly, the Middle Kingdom's maritime strategy is not limited to the production sector alone. As a CSIS report indicates, China controls terminals in nearly 100 ports worldwide. Particularly notable were attempts to acquire dual-use infrastructure in Germany and Australia. In 2023, Chinese COSCO acquired nearly 25% of shares in the port of Hamburg, partly thanks to support from then-Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The dominance is visible in almost every field. In the area of port crane production, Chinese companies control as much as 70% of the global market. China State Shipbuilding Corporation, CSSC, plays a leading role in China's industrial strategy. It is the world's largest shipbuilding group and one of the best examples of civilian-military fusion in China. CSSC is essentially a conglomerate bringing together research centers, ports, and factories. Key positions are held by party dignitaries and military representatives. The group includes over 80 companies and 200,000 employees, showing the scale of sector consolidation. Importantly, all shipyards, including those with dual-use capabilities, are part of CSSC. Following this, the new maritime strategy presented in 2012 by Xi Jinping announced simultaneous focus on civilian and military areas, which perfectly aligned with the broader dual circulation strategy and promotion of civilian-military fusion under state aegis. One exemplary regulation required civilian ships to meet rigorous technical requirements similar to military vessels. In 2015, under the Made in China 2025 industrial strategy, the shipbuilding sector was named one of the 10 main priorities of the Communist Party. In 2017, a special commission for civilian-military fusion was established, which dispelled doubts about Xi Jinping's priorities. In 2019, central authorities pressured the merger between the two largest entities in the sector, further strengthening CSSC market position. It is difficult to imagine similar concentration of resources and production capacity in free market Western democracies. Currently, the conglomerate's assets are even 4 times larger than Korean competitor Hyundai Heavy Industries, which dominates its own market. Add to this licensing agreements, joint venture partnerships, and technology transfer from foreign entities, which for decades, often unknowingly, strengthened Chinese know-how in strategic industry branches. With increasing scale, the Chinese focus on mastering more advanced value chains, capturing market shares in the production of cruise ships, LNG tankers, and container ships, where China secured 80% of global contracts, covering deliveries until the end of the decade. The advantage is also visible in container ships, which are the core of global maritime trade. China already controls over 80% of the global market here. If the United States want to realistically compete with China at sea, it must do more than just pump money into the fleet. It must rebuild the entire industrial technological ecosystem, preferably with state participation. Observers indicate that active state assistance is the best remedy for the most acute problems of the shipbuilding sector resulting from chronic neglect and years of disinvestment. However, the key to long-term success will be private investment, which will appear along with the influx of multi-year state contracts. The problem is that there is a shortage of workers. Both in the US and allied countries, Japan and South Korea, there is a worker deficit. Greater automation could be a solution, but this requires time. Similar personnel problems with recruiting new personnel also afflict Western navies, particularly in the case of submarine crews. Another way to improve the current situation is to deepen allied cooperation. US military partners, led by South Korea and Japan, control about 1/3 of global maritime ship production. And indeed, the US Navy has already announced plans to conduct maintenance and repairs in allied ports to reduce pressure on the domestic industry. A good example is the ongoing cooperation with Japan in maintaining American warships stationed at their bases. India has also expressed readiness to expand cooperation. State regulations that were implemented over 100 years ago under the aforementioned Jones Act, which hinders the purchase of ships from abroad, may stand in the way though. Another solution could be the influx of foreign investment to expand the American industrial technological base. In 2024, South Korean Hanwha Group purchased an old production facility in Pennsylvania to resume ship production in the US. However, the main barrier still consists of concerns regarding ownership structure and protection of sensitive technologies. Moreover, further investments of this type seem to be in question due to the economic nationalism of Donald Trump's administration and the threat of imposing trade barriers on America's allies. Already, the previous Joe Biden administration was reluctant toward foreign investments in strategic sectors, exemplified by the blocking of the steel factory purchase by Japanese Nippon, which was only lifted in June this year. Over all of this hangs the specter of global trade war and potential consequences for the shipbuilding sector and the entire maritime economy. Heads of the largest firms in the sector, such as Maersk, 20% of global container production, are skeptical about the short-term consequences of trade war. In their view, a revolution in the global trade system, along with deconstruction of current supply chains, would require many years of reforms and changes in business decisions. However, the private sector is exceptionally sensitive to changes in political discourse, as evidenced by approximately 40% decline in trade between China and the US recorded in April this year, caused by the threat of introducing new tariffs.
Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake." The Chinese are exploiting this American mistake of omission with complete determination.
China has built the largest merchant fleet in history, controls ports on 6 continents, and produces ships at a pace that gives the Pentagon chills. The question is, will America wake up before it's too late? Will it find the political will to compete with China in one of the most important domains of rivalry? History shows that maritime powers that neglected their fleets quickly lost their hegemonic status. Spain, the Netherlands, Great Britain all went down this path. Will America follow in their footsteps?